Hello, welcome to This World. Vladimir Amelyan joins us from Kiev, and he is currently on the front line fighting Russian troops.
We believe that the world should be ruled by democracies.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Here's a look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. It is a story that is as murky as it could get. Several twists and turns there. 48 hours ago, when a plane crashed in Russia, it soon became a global headline. And turned out the chief of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was on the list of passengers. But was he really on board? Was he dead? Was he alive? There was no clear, definitive answer. And as the speculation continued, 24 hours ago, the Russian President Vladimir Putin came out and broke his silence and expressed his condolences. The Wagner chief is dead, but the story does not end there. In fact, it is just the beginning of a whole new story. The death of the Wagner chief has given birth to a series of questions, particularly over the timing. Also, what happens now? What does the death of the Wagner chief mean for the Russian president? And also for the Russia-Ukraine war? We focus on this and more in just a few minutes from now. Also on the show for you tonight, has the Pakistan army taken over in a silent coup? We get you the very latest from on the ground. Why is George Soros targeting India? What's the latest? Why is he once again making headlines? We get you the complete story. The impact of climate change being witnessed around the world, it has now ended up killing thousands of penguins. We tell you more. Why does Prince Albert of Monaco need an appointment to see his wife? We tell you the complete story. Let me start off by telling you a story. On the evening of August 23rd, residents of a small Russian village called Kuzenkino were rattled by the sound of an explosion in the sky. They then watched a jet fall into the Russian countryside and burst into flames. No one on that plane survived the crash. As it turns out, the Wagner chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the man who posed the biggest challenge to the Russian President Vladimir Putin's authority in recent times, was among the 10 people who died in that crash. Vladimir Putin has expressed his condolences. He has called Prigozhin a man of complicated fate. Let me just repeat that for you. A man of complicated fate. Prigozhin came for the king in the Kremlin and he was killed. The king's grip on power is now stronger than ever, even if it took 2 months. Only a few doubt that Putin was behind what the US believes was an assassination attempt. But let's just be clear. If it is ever proven that the plane crash was an act of deliberate, cold-blooded revenge, it will go down as the ultimate special military operation. Ever since he led a mutinous march on Moscow in late June, the Wagner boss was seen as what many called a dead man walking. In late June, Prigozhin said his mercenaries were only marching to Moscow to oust the Russian defense minister and the chief of staff of the armed forces, General Valery Gerasimov. Prigozhin, you see, had accused both of mismanaging the Russia-Ukraine war, and that too in profane terms. But an armed rebellion in Russia was a clear challenge to the Russian president, and he looked surprisingly vulnerable when he failed to crush that mutiny. After all, he had denounced the group's leaders as traitors. But as is the case in today's Russia, we know very little about what really goes on in Putin's court. What we do know is that Putin does not and would not forgive. Perhaps Yevgeny Prigozhin knew his days were numbered. According to Russian media reports, in fact, he had taken his private jets to confuse people, checking in for a flight but never actually getting on board, or flying with two at once so that no one could tell which one he was actually on. But that trick seems to have failed him this time. On the ill-fated day, 2 of his jets were airborne, but while the second landed unharmed near Moscow, the one carrying him crashed. So how did he manage to defy Putin and still remain alive for so long? Remember that rebellion took place in the month of June. He appeared down but not out. From being filmed in Belarus to being photographed on the sidelines of the Russia-Africa summit. And then this week, he was seen armed and ready in camouflage somewhere in Africa, reportedly. For 2 months, everything was upside down in Russia. For 2 months, Vladimir Putin looked rather weak. People assumed, in fact, that Prigozhin could manage a second act. He was seen continuing Wagner's work in Africa, where his mercenaries are most active, in countries like CAR, Libya, Mali, Sudan, in countries that have strained ties with the West. Russia's African project relied on him. But in Russia, the Kremlin was moving to remove hardliners, quote-unquote, who criticized the Ukraine war. Igor Girkin, a former commander of the Russian proxy forces in Ukraine, was arrested last month, in fact. He had persistently criticized Putin and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And then the Russian general, Sergei Surovikin, or General Armageddon, as he was called, he was sacked as the Air Force chief. He has not been seen in public since the Wagner mutiny. But let's just get back to focusing on the Wagner chief, Prigozhin. Vladimir Putin was taking his time, it seems, to assess the damage, to disperse the Wagner's forces. Over the last 2 months, the mercenaries were spread out geographically. Some were sent to Belarus, others to Africa. Putin knew striking Prigozhin would be a gamble, and he needed to wait for the right time to play his card. A time when the chances of a reaction would be close to zero. The Wagner mercenaries had to disappear. General Armageddon had to disappear. Also, what better cover than bricks? And with the Wagner chief gone, Putin has sent out a message that he was waiting to. For Prigozhin's men, the message is one of fear, and for the Russian armed forces, it is that of revenge. And for everyone else who is following this story, the message is quite clear. You do not cross Vladimir Putin. Let's now talk about what's happening in Pakistan. The story begins with some questions. Is the Pakistan army officially running the country now? Has it taken over the country's governance in a silent coup? I mean, just have a look at the state of affairs in the country. The Prime Minister has resigned, a former Prime Minister is in jail, and the interim Prime Minister happens to be the army's man. Not just him. If you look at the names of Pakistan's interim leaders, it will seem as if the entire interim government is being run by the army. Let's start off with the interim Prime Minister himself, Anwar-ul-Haq Kakar. He has been serving a 6-year term in Pakistan's Senate since the year 2018. He is a member of the Balochistan Awami Party, which is widely considered, by the way, to be close to the military. The party was formed in March 2018, and many reports at that time had said that its formation was a bid to prevent ethno-nationalists in Balochistan from winning polls, and that the party and its leaders had the blessings of Pakistan's generals. So when Kakar was named the interim Prime Minister, the appointment naturally raised a lot of eyebrows, mainly because he was not particularly well known within the political circles of Pakistan. In fact, a member of the outgoing ruling coalition went to the extent of saying that his appointment was a surprise for many in the alliance government itself. But what is this really supposed to mean? Is the army running the country through their appointee? Well, it certainly seems like that. And then we have the interim defense minister, Anwar Ali Haider. He is a retired lieutenant general and he is now handling the Ministry of Defense. Observers say this is because the defense ministers in caretaker governments have usually been former generals. But if you look at Pakistan's recent history, it tells you a completely different story. In June 2018, when Nawaz Sharif was ousted, Abdullah Hussain Haroon was named the defense minister. Earlier, he was the Speaker of Pakistan's Sindh Assembly, not an army general. And likewise, in 2007, Salim Abbas Jilani was named Pakistan's defense minister. And he too, by the way, was not associated with the army, not to the best of our knowledge. And it does not even end there. You see, Pakistan has what's called the Special Investment Facilitation Center, a body which is basically the military's brainchild. Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff is the chairman of the board of this council. It also has representatives from the ISI. And a few days after Anwar-ul-Haq Kakar was named the interim prime minister, he attended a meeting of the NSIC. And we wonder what the meeting was all about. My point here is simple. There are so many developments that indicate just how the interim government in Pakistan has the army's footprints all over it. And by all means, the army generals have used their power to take over the helm of affairs once again. And this was evident for quite some time, in fact. You see, ever since the May 9 protests, when Imran Khan supporters, remember, stormed the offices and homes of Pakistan's generals, it was rather obvious that the army was slowly but certainly striking back. Not just against Imran Khan and the PTI, but also against the Shehbaz Sharif government. And if I speak of the PTI specifically, immediately after those protests, a host of them distanced themselves, remember, from Imran Khan. Some pledged loyalty to the party, some were herded into a new party, while some ostensibly quit politics. And even now, the families of some former PTI leaders are being targeted. Take the case of Shireen Mazari. Just last Sunday, Mazari's daughter and human rights lawyer, Iman Zainab Mazari, was arrested. The arrest came just hours after she referred to the army generals as quote-unquote terrorists. Her mother is calling the arrest an abduction. She says this is a sign that Pakistan is under state fascism. As for the previous Shehbaz Sharif government, it is facing no such troubles. But have a look at where its hobnobbing with the army has really taken it. They are out of power, preparing for general elections. But there is still no guarantee that they might actually win. The only outcome of their hobnobbing, like subverting the constitution or undermining the parliament, has only crippled democracy in Pakistan and strengthened the army behemoths. And reports say the interim government will rule Pakistan for just 90 days. But if we go by how things are unfolding in the country, it seems like they might just last slightly longer. Will China help Saudi Arabia become a nuclear power? Our next story highlights a significant development in West Asia. Riyadh is reportedly considering a bid from Beijing to construct its first ever nuclear plant. The move raises a series of serious questions. Number one, what does this growing bonhomie between Saudi Arabia and China mean for the United States? Number two, what does it mean for India? Saudi Arabia, remember, is India's strategic partner, and we will answer that in just a bit. First, the basics. Saudi officials have informed the Wall Street Journal that they are currently exploring an offer from China National Nuclear Corp. It is an offer to establish a nuclear facility. And where will the facility be built? Near the borders of Qatar and the UAE. China also has shared its side of the story.
China will continue to conduct mutually beneficial cooperation with Saudi Arabia in various fields, including civil nuclear energy, while strictly abiding by international non-proliferation obligations.
And now that you've heard both the sides speak, here's something you may want to note. This potential nuclear program aligns with the strategic goal of the Saudi Crown Prince. I'm talking about Mohammed bin Salman. He wants to diversify Saudi Arabia's energy sources, and the creation of a nuclear energy sector fits rather perfectly with that goal. And for the United States, though, the development means bad news. Reports say the Saudis and Americans were in talks for building a nuclear plant. So what happened there? The Americans sought significant concessions from Riyadh, you see. They put conditions. What kind of conditions exactly? Americans reportedly said that they will only help Saudi Arabia if, number one, Riyadh refrains from uranium enrichment. In other words, not walk down the path of building nuclear weapons. And number two, Riyadh also refrains from mining uranium on its own soil. China's help does not seem to come with these clauses. So what happens next? Will Beijing and Riyadh jointly lay the foundation stone, or will the Biden administration have to compromise on its non-proliferation requirements? Saudi officials have reportedly told the Wall Street Journal that Riyadh would prefer partnering with America. Not just that, Saudis will also prefer hiring a South Korean firm to build the plant. And that said, if Washington refuses to budge on its demands, the Saudis are willing to go with Beijing. The Chinese President Xi Jinping would want nothing less, of course. Beijing wants to build as many as 30 nuclear reactors across Asia, Africa and West Asia over the next decade. This is part of Xi Jinping's grand BRI blueprint. Building a nuclear reactor in Saudi Arabia will also help China expand its influence in West Asia. And Xi Jinping, by the way, visited Saudi Arabia in December 2022. China is also brokering Saudi Arabia and Iran peace, the nuclear reaction, in fact, the latest, taking the growing closeness between the Saudis and the Chinese a step forward. Remember, this is a relationship based on trade. Beijing is Riyadh's largest trading partner. China and Saudi Arabia have extensive trade relations in the energy field. China is the world's biggest importer of crude oil and Saudi Arabia the biggest exporter. State-run China Energy Engineering Corp is also building a 2.6 GW solar power station in Al Shuaibah, alongside Saudi utility developer ACWA Power. It is being touted as West Asia's largest solar project. In recent years, Riyadh and Beijing have publicly announced several joint nuclear projects, including one to extract uranium from seawater. And that project will help Saudi Arabia develop a nuclear energy program or become a uranium exporter. In 2017, Saudi Arabia and China agreed to cooperate on nuclear energy projects in order to support the kingdom's nuclear energy program. And at that time, the China National Nuclear Corp signed an MOU with the Saudi Geological Survey to pursue cooperation in exploring and assessing uranium and thorium resources. And the Chinese nuclear companies could offer complete construction and operation packages with attractive financing options. In parallel with civilian nuclear energy cooperation with China, Saudi Arabia had also entered talks with the Trump administration. However, the kingdom has consistently refused to sign on to the standard International Atomic Energy Agency requirements, and this led to a deadlock in the discussions regarding nuclear cooperation with the US. It was at this point that Saudi Arabia turned to Beijing. A relatively unfettered access to nuclear technology, and it is cheaper. But what does all of this mean for India? New Delhi and Riyadh are strategic partners. For India, China's entry into Saudi Arabia's nuclear plans could mean key friends slipping deeper into the dragon's grip. What about the region, West Asia? There are fears that Saudi Arabia's acquisition of nuclear capability could draw regional powers to join the regional nuclear race. It could also spur a regional nuclear arms race. And our next story is about George Soros, one of the most controversial figures in the world, with as many supporters as detractors. Some say he is a legend. Others call him a man of malicious influence. A billionaire who is able to manipulate markets, someone who can sway politics and global opinion. But why are we talking about him? Because a group backed by George Soros is planning an expose on Indian firms. You heard that right. A billionaire with investments in some of the biggest organizations in the world plans to go after Indian corporates. I mean, who gave him this right? And would he do an expose on his own business dealings? We'll get to those questions in just a bit. Let's first tell you what the plan is all about and the organization that is apparently going to be executing it. Reports say the expose is being planned by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP. This is an organization which is funded by the likes of Soros and Rockefeller Brothers Fund. In fact, it calls itself an investigative reporting platform formed by 24 non-profit investigative centers. And it's spread across Europe, Africa, Asia, Latin America. This is the website of the group that I'm talking about. It has a listicle mentioning the organizations that support it. And the key names mentioned include Open Society Foundations, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and the Sigrid Rosing Trust, another group that's associated with Soros. So what is the group planning really? Here's what we know so far. The so-called expose may involve overseas funds investing in the stocks of some unnamed corporate houses. And the identity of the corporate houses is not known, but agencies are keeping a tight vigil on the capital market. And this is the only piece of information that's available. Now, I cannot help but ask certain questions here. Is this another Hindenburg moment? Another allegedly motivated campaign to target Indian firms, a campaign to tarnish India's image in the global market? I ask these questions because of the man who is allegedly behind it, George Soros. He has a history of anti-India activism, you see. In January 2020, Soros unveiled a plan to set up a $1 billion fund to build a global network of higher educational institutions that will help students put up a resistance against growing nationalism. He singled out several countries and their leaders, and India was one of them. He called India a Hindu nationalist state, which is suffering the biggest and most frightening setback. And a year later, a scandal hit India. It suggested that the Indian government was spying on its citizens. And who was behind this project? 17 media organizations and 2 global entities. Amnesty International, Forbidden Stories, they are both beneficiaries of grants and funds from the Open Society Foundations. In the year 2018, in fact, Amnesty received a €137,000 grant from the OSF for a campaign to repeal a law Ireland had passed. And interestingly, it was ordered to return this donation. And then we have Forbidden Stories. It has been proven to receive funds from the US State Department. And guess who do they feature as a supporter on their website? The Open Society Foundations. And here's something else that you must know. Sherpa, a French NGO which is a persistent litigator in India's Rafale deal with France, has also been a recipient of indirect funds from the OSF through a third party. Simply put, a revolving door spins between these NGOs and the offices of George Soros, and the same goes for the media organizations involved in the project. Can this nexus between news organizations and George Soros be ignored? Can these links be dismissed as a baseless conspiracy theory? A billionaire, after all, is using his power, influence, and yes, his money to make media networks shape narratives across countries and to go after establishments that don't seem to match his vision of the world. It gets murkier as you dig deeper, and there's certainly a nexus that operates to alter political realities the world over, a nexus that runs from the political corridors of liberal powers to the many offices of the Open Society Foundations across the world. Let's now tell you about an epidemic plaguing the UK. This story is not about the Wuhan virus. It's about the menace of shoplifting. Recently, hundreds of teenagers attempted a mass robbery. Reports say at least 34 teenagers have been given dispersal orders and 9 have been arrested for offences like going equipped to steal. Although studies show that such thefts have doubled since the year 2017, the number of people being charged has collapsed. And experts are criticizing the government for taking shoplifting and theft too lightly. What really has led to the rise in such activities? Our next report getting you the complete story.
Chaos on the street. Several people running. Police arresting suspects. These scenes are from London's Oxford Street, where several people gathered to rob a sports store. Believe it or not, the people were invited through social media. They wanted to replicate a looting spree that happened last year in response to the mass robbery attempt. The Metropolitan Police say that anyone committing a crime can expect to be dealt with robustly. The UK is facing a rise in shoplifting and theft cases. Reports say that over the past 13 years, the Tory government has in effect decriminalised most shoplifting, mugging, theft, robbery and minor assault. The British Retail Consortium, which represents 70% of Britain's retailers, says that theft incidents have doubled since 2017 and now stand at 8 million a year. But on the other hand, the number of people being charged has fallen drastically. A decade ago, 80,000 people were being punished in a year, but last year, only 21,000 people were charged. Critics say that the government is taking shoplifting and theft too lightly, and they may not be wrong. In 2014, shoplifting was redefined as the stealing of less than nearly $255 worth of goods. What was the punishment? Close to $90. That's all. And those who plead guilty can pay the fine through post. They don't even have to visit the court. This could be a sign that the authorities did not find the crime worth an investigation. Shops and supermarkets are desperately trying to keep their establishment safe. A supermarket chain called Waitrose is offering free hot drinks to the police. Why? So that shoplifters and robbers think twice before making an attempt. Otherwise, in the absence of the police, shop staff have to face robbers themselves. Critics have questioned the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. They are calling it acute political hypocrisy on her part, because she called out the US for the rising shoplifting and theft cases there. Shouldn't Braverman focus on what's happening in the UK before pointing fingers at the US? Allowing fear and suspicion is opposite to what the Conservatives say they stand for. It can reward lawlessness, encourage criminal networks, and make diligent citizens feel foolish for abiding by the law. Although Braverman has called for hunting down and locking up the criminals, experts say it's not possible till more police personnel are physically present. The police will need to protect the suburban high streets, which have now become easy targets, and the UK needs to control this epidemic before it becomes deadlier. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And that's not even all. London is facing another virus. Pickpocketing. It's become a serious issue. Studies show that pickpocketing has more than doubled since 2021, and the tube system's central line has been hit the worst. The British Transport Police saying that pickpocketing cases reached a record high last year with nearly 7,900 cases. Studies show that some London boroughs have been hit the hardest. They include Westminster, Camden, Southwark, Hackney, Lambeth. So why exactly are train stations becoming pickpocketing hubs, you ask? You see, the new cases are surfacing as London ramps up its tourism campaigns. The number of tourists is higher than the pre-pandemic levels, and the train system is the easiest and the cheapest mode of travel for visitors. Thus, the thieves aim for the London tube system. Studies show that 50% of the thefts take place on the trains. 23% of them are committed on the station platform, 7% taking place at the entrances and exits. And the other incidents often take place when a person is in transit. And reports say the police are now warning the citizens to be extra vigilant while traveling. Experts say that the crime is unique as it does not use physical force. They say, and I'm quoting, pickpocketing covers the theft of items directly from the victim, but without the use of physical force, and so easily accessible items like mobile phones, wallets tend to be the most targeted. And experts say that the criminal often sells the stolen item before the police can even catch them. And then there's also the factor of flaws in technology. The police often cannot trace the criminal as they often disable the device to make it untraceable. But you see, there are a few ways in which you can stay safe. If you are carrying a bag, keep it in front of yourself. Remember to return credit cards or cash to your wallet, sealing it before putting it in your pocket. Also keeping a list of phone numbers separately with you, just in case, God forbid, your phone gets stolen. Use a money belt if you are carrying a significant amount of cash. And we thought the shoplifting epidemic would be a challenge for the UK, but now pickpocketing is slowly catching up. The question is, will safety become a luxury for Londoners? Let me now ask you this. Do you think your workplace is toxic? Well, wait till you hear about what this particular boss did. An employee took to Reddit to share what had been going on at work and what he said may take you by surprise, or also remind you of your childhood days when a trip to the washroom needed approval from your teacher. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. It's exactly that, but on a larger and more serious level. The Redditor's boss wanted to know where the employees are at all times. He wanted them to sign out whenever they went to the bathroom. Can you imagine doing that at work? How long are your bathroom breaks for anyway? 5 minutes? Maybe 10 minutes? Are they really long enough to be taken out from your working hours? And this person we are talking about, by the way, is a senior member of his team. He has given 18 years of his life to that company. And when he told his boss he would not sign out for the loo breaks, can you believe that he actually received a threat in return? The boss, the employee claims, said she would write him up for insubordination, or in better terms, failing to follow instructions. Is this justified? The employee said he was contemplating going to the HR and, in the worst case scenario, to quit. Can we blame him? Who would want to work at a place where every single minute of your workday is monitored? And it's not even a question of productivity, but of age-old HR policies that have become redundant at this point. You see, most offices have designated numbers of working hours. Yours may have them too. Let's suppose you need to be in office for 9 hours. And if you punch out before that, it affects your paycheck. But tell me this, does it take 9 hours every day to finish your work, your assignments, to complete the tasks assigned to you, to stay on top of your to-do list? There are days when you have to work overtime, and then there are days when the work is done in probably half the time. Some employees may finish their tasks faster than others as well. So does staying in office for 9 hours really define productivity? If a manager is counting every minute of your day, then they are just being a bad leader. Because a good one knows how long it would take their team member to do their work and just how productive they actually are. The idea of clocking in designated hours, being monitored while you're clocking in those hours, fuels work trends like presenteeism and quiet quitting. Let me just elaborate for those unfamiliar with these terms. Presenteeism talks about employees hanging around their cubicles for longer than required. They may not even be working on anything, but still they would stay at work just to clock in those hours. But the question is, does that even help with productivity in any way? We don't think so. And then there is quiet quitting. In this one, employees just do the bare minimum. They put in minimum effort to keep their job and don't really go the extra mile. An employee may be able to finish a task in just 4 hours, but they would still drag it on to finish their work shift, clock in those hours. You see, in both these scenarios, the employees are putting in the hours, but neither is actually helping the company, nor is it helping the employee. If anything, it would take a toll on their productivity and disrupt their work-life balance, which employees are increasingly taking more seriously, by the way. So isn't it about time that we rethink these policies? Maybe they worked in the past, but in this day and age, they seem to be irrelevant. Why not focus more on the outcome rather than the output? Why not pay attention to the work done instead of the work hours? Why not let an employee leave when work is done instead of clocking in X number of hours? Booking a doctor's appointment or an appointment with your lawyer or property dealer may be something normal for you. But how would you feel if you had to book an appointment to see your own spouse? I know that sounds bizarre. In today's time, when everyone is either constantly busy or on their phones, taking out time and planning date nights on your Google Calendar isn't all that bizarre anymore. But downright booking an appointment? Now that has an air of formality you wouldn't expect to have with your own partner. However, for this royal couple, it is the norm. Princess Charlene of Monaco now reportedly lives in Switzerland. Her husband, Prince Albert, has to book an appointment every time he wants to meet her. Their marriage has been troubled for long. Except for ceremonial or formal events, the couple reportedly rarely meet. But you see, in public, Albert and Charlene try to appear as a loving couple. They were reportedly last seen together on the 29th of July, arm in arm at a Red Cross ball in Monaco. No matter how much they tried, their discomfort could not escape the public eye. The royal couple have 8-year-old twins, Prince Jacques and Princess Gabriella. But according to reports, they take turns looking after the children. You see, Albert and Charlene are poles apart. Charlene is a former Olympic swimmer. She met Albert in 2000 in Monaco, where she was representing South Africa. Their backgrounds cannot be any more different. Charlene's father was a photocopier salesman. Her mother, a competitive diver and swimming coach. Prince Albert, on the other hand, was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He is the only son of Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier III. And for years now, he has been embroiled in a scandal. Shortly after ascending to the throne in the year 2005, a French publication revealed that Albert had an illegitimate 18-year-old son. Prince Albert had him, reportedly, with an ex-flight attendant, Nicole Coste. Albert officially acknowledged his son that year. A year later, DNA tests confirmed that Albert has another child. She is now known to be Jasmine Grace, an American actress. Prince Albert tied the knot with Charlene in the year 2011. There were allegations that Charlene tried to run away in the days leading to the marriage. Some also say that she wept throughout the ceremony. And once the two got married, people expected the days of sordid gossip to end, but it only got worse. In the year 2021, a woman made allegations in Italian court. She claimed that her daughter is also Prince Albert's. The prince's lawyer then dismissed in public this as a sham, but the speculation only grew. In the year 2021, Charlene had planned a brief trip to South Africa, but the princess ended up spending more than 6 months away from her family. On paper, the extended stay due to an ongoing ear, nose and throat issue, due to which Charlene could not fly back to Monaco. But when she did return, she remained out of the public eye. And soon it was announced that she would be entering a treatment facility. Why is that? To deal with exhaustion, both emotional and physical. And ultimately, it was more than a year before she returned to royal duties. And ever since, rumors of their separation have been flying around. The royal couple have repeatedly denied them, but now reports have emerged that Charlene has set up a home in Switzerland and she only meets Prince Albert when he books an appointment. How do you feel about this? Should this be encouraged generally, or is it a bit too formal for you? Or will it give you a renewed sense of individuality? Much needed space, perhaps. Maybe some time to focus on just yourself. Maybe such an arrangement could help the couple take care of their children better, carry out their social responsibilities, or would it drive them further apart without a chance of reconciliation? Let us know what you think about this. And before we end tonight's show, I want to tell you a little story. It's about an 8-year-old boy. His name is Garvit. He stays in India's National Capital Region with his parents. Garvit was going to his tuition class or coaching class. The teacher stays on the ground floor of the same apartment building. So Garvit took the elevator downstairs, just like he would do every time. But this time, Garvit's mother was not accompanying him. She was unwell. So she asked Garvit to go alone. Garvit took the lift. And within seconds, that lift unfortunately stopped. 8-year-old Garvit found himself stranded in an elevator all alone. Now, this is a nightmare a lot of us adults have as well. What if we get stuck in an elevator? What if we are alone? What would we do? What if the lights go off and no one comes to our rescue? And here you had Garvit, all of 8 years old, living that nightmare. So what did he do? Garvit recalled that his parents had told him how to react in such a situation. And so the little boy pressed the emergency button of the lift, but there was no response. Garvit then began knocking on the door of the lift. Again, there was no response. The 8-year-old tried shouting, calling for help. No response this time as well. Imagine the little boy's horror. But Garvit was brave. He did not panic. He recalled how his parents would also often ask him to keep calm during stressful situations. The 8-year-old decided to distract himself. And he did that in the most unique way. Perhaps something that is idiosyncratic to Indian kids. Alone in the stranded lift, Garvit opened his backpack that he was carrying to his tuition class. He took out his textbook and notebook and started doing his homework. I repeat, his homework. Minutes turned into an hour. Garvit continued doing his homework. Around 6 o'clock, the boy's tuition teacher rang up his home. Why hasn't Garvit reached the class yet? The teacher asked his mother. It had been an hour since the boy left home, you see. Garvit's mother panicked. She called her husband. He was not at home at that time. The parents began searching for their son. They checked with the building security guard, asked him whether he had seen Garvit leave the apartment. The guard had not. No one had. And soon they realized that the little boy was stuck in the lift. An SOS message was sent to the technical team, but it would take another hour for the technicians to arrive and rescue the boy. Garvit came out of the lift at 7 p.m., 2 hours after he got stranded. And all this while, Garvit kept himself busy by doing his homework. What a story, right? Garvit is more brave than most of us adults. And he probably handled that difficult situation a lot better than most of us as well. But the story is not just about his ability to handle that kind of stress. It's about how Garvit handled that stress as well, what his coping mechanism was. Homework. A horror that has followed all of us through our childhood. Like Garvit, most of our childhood was spent at school, followed by tuition classes, then homework, God forbid, tuition homework, and then back to school the next day. Those watching us from India will especially be able to relate to this. Like Garvit, most of us had tuitions on a Sunday as well, all the more on Sundays because school was closed, so there is a lot more time that the student had. During summer vacations, there would be around 30 days worth of homework, and then there would be school projects. While in middle school, there would be presentations that involved putting together assignments in clear files. While in high school, these projects and presentations determine the final school leaving percentile. In short, homework was always there, following students just about everywhere. To their family home during summer breaks as well, or to hill stations, or wherever the family was spending the summer. There was always a bag of homework on a child's back. Many of us would do everything in our capacity, in fact, to get rid of the homework, of that bag. We would try to finish the homework during free classes or lunch breaks or in the school bus back home. You know, just so that we could spend our time playing with our friends or doing something that had nothing to do with studies and academics. Garvit too, perhaps, was trying to make the most of his time that he had in that stranded lift. You know, so that once he got out of that lift, he could go out of the apartment into the playground or the lawn and just play with his friends, perhaps. Live his childhood. And in that innocent act of time saving, Garvit displayed a level of bravery that will be hard to match by someone of his age. We send all our love to this little champ. And the good news is things will hopefully be changing soon. India's Ministry of Education is working on a new curriculum framework, and it looks very promising, to say the least. What does this new curriculum entail, you ask? To start with, 2 board exams a year. Now, before you fall off your chair, you might want to listen to the details here. Students will not have to take 2 board exams. Instead, they will have the option of taking the exams in 2 slots. Say you are confident of your preparation in biology, and then you can take your board exam in March. If not, you revise for another month and take the exam in April or the month after, whenever the second exam is offered. This will also allow you to prepare better. You can compartmentalize subjects, prepare accordingly, and take your exams in 2 halves. Say you revise English, environment, education, and history in March, take your exams, and then sit down to prepare for the other subjects. Which also reminds me that under the new framework, students of classes 11 and 12 will have to study 2 languages, and one of the 2 has to be an Indian language. It could be Hindi, Punjabi, Bangla, anything. And here's something else that's changing. Your subject combination. It's getting better, by the way. The new framework gives students a wider choice. They will no longer be restricted by the traditional segregation. You will not be a student of humanities, commerce, or science, but a student who pursues history along with biology or biotechnology or even computer science. This new framework is in accordance with the National Education Policy of 2020 and will be implemented from the coming academic year. On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. This is me, Molly Gambhir, signing off. Thanks very much for watching. Have a good weekend. Leaving you with Gravitas Images.
It's easy to tell you a flat story. It's easy to show you what's happening around the world.